Hi, I'm Aaron Tomlinson, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning into this video. And before I get started, I just want to talk about we have a growing community on Facebook. It's called New Day Global Community. The link is in my bio. And we'd love to have you join and be part of that community. There's a lot of good discussion. The idea is to build a community. So there's people from different belief systems and ideas and ideologies, but sharing together. Most of us have deconstructed from our faith in Christianity, but not all of us. So we'd love to have you be part of that. Or if you just want to sit back and observe and get access to other free content that we do, then join the New Day Global Community Group. Again, that link is in my bio. In this video, I want to talk to you about spirit guides. I want to do real talk about spirit guides. Also, if you're interested in supporting our work, we do work with a nonprofit organization, New Day Global, New Day Ministries, the Awakening Center, and the PayPal link, if you want to donate, is in the description. So without any further ado, let's jump into this. So I've talked a lot on this channel and my live videos and other special videos that I've made. I've talked a lot about how we think about the nature of reality and how we think about the world. And I've talked a lot about scientific materialism. I've talked about the hard problem of consciousness. And that's kind of where I want to begin with this talk about spirit guides. So to the scientific materialist, all that exists, every aspect of reality can be observed, measured, quantified, and understood, because all that exists in this world, all that is part of our reality, is external to us. It's outside of us. Now, I'm going to use a big word. It's ontology is outside of us. The word ontology means the study of the nature of something. So I think it's pretty self-evident that this material world is ontological, that it exists independently of any of us. And we know this, if for no other reason, we know that when someone dies, their world or their experience in this world comes to an end. They no longer exist as part of this ontological reality of the physical world. And yet we know that the physical world still exists. So I live in Colorado, and if I were to look out my window outside, I can see I have a great, wonderful view of the mountains, specifically Pikes Peak and Cheyenne Mountain up in Colorado Springs. And I realize that they were here before me and they'll be here after me. So they have an ontological reality. So for the scientific materialist, the only things that are ontological are the physical spaces and material world in which we live, which, of course, if you get into the quantum aspects of it, it consists of molecules and protons and electrons and quarks and bosons and so forth, right? So that is for the scientific materialist. That's all there is, and everything can be explained. And given us sufficiently enough time, so many atheists who are scientific materialists use the same method that they argue against people who believe in God, or that they argue against Christians. They call it the God of the gaps. Anything that science hasn't explained yet, anything that science doesn't know or that is a mystery to us at our current progress in scientific knowledge, gets attributed to God. So God only exists in the gaps. The scientific materialist often does the same thing, but they don't insert God, they insert time. Given enough time, or they insert knowledge, given enough time, given enough knowledge or enough understanding, we'll eventually understand this reality. That's every bit as much a presupposition. There's no proof for that. We don't know that yet. So that is a presupposition. Now, there's nothing wrong with having presuppositions. We all have them. And we have to use our reason and our intellect to try to conclude what is the nature of reality and to try to cope and deal with these gaps. So for the scientific materialist, that's all there is. But we know that that does not make up every aspect of human reality. And this is where the hard problem of consciousness comes in, because no one else can observe or measure or repeat my internal reality. They rely on my self-reporting. So how am I feeling? How am I experiencing those feelings? What foods do I like and what foods don't I like? What is love like for me? What did I dream about last night? Nobody can see inside of that world. Science can't penetrate that experience. Now, they may be able to measure the effects of that experience, which again, to a large degree, is dependent upon my self-reporting, right? So I could be misremembering, I could be exaggerating, I could be lying. So it's really hard to get accurate data that will fit with the scientific model to even begin to explore that realm. But at the end of the day, based on the current scientific model, that part of my experience, that part of your experience, that part of my reality, that part of your reality is completely off limits to anything that is observable, measurable, or repeatable. Anybody ever have a great dream, a really good dream, and wake up in the middle of it and try to go back to it? Now, I've been able to do that where I go back into the dream, but I miss more times than I hit with that. Usually it's like, oh man, that was such a good dream. I want to go back to that dream, and I try to go back to it and I have a nightmare or something. So, but you see, I think I'm illustrating my point. And so I think that part of the question is, when we're dealing with the nature of reality, and if we do not accept the limitations and the reductionism, and I want to be very clear on that, the limitations and reductionism of the scientific materialist model and philosophy and worldview, if we do not accept that, the reductionist part of it. In other words, the scientific method and the way we approach science today has done an exemplary job of explaining to us the physical aspects of our experience and the physical aspects of our reality. It does a good job of exploring what's out there that can be observed and that can be measured. Where it fails for me is that it cannot explore what's in here, or it cannot explore what's in you. We are each the explorers of our own internal worlds. So I'm not rejecting science. I very much believe in science. I very much am interested in science. I think science has done wonders for us and has lots and lots to offer us in the future. I think there is more knowledge, and given enough time, there are things out there that will be understood and explained. I just don't think that everything that we experience is all there is. I think there is more. I think there are other levels and layers to reality that are outside of the scope of this physical material world. And so this brings us to philosophical questions, because we have to use philosophy, we have to use comparison in order to find data and to draw conclusions. Any kind of survey is data that's based on self-reporting. Any kind of experience that a person had, let's say if you're part of the UFO community or UAP community, and I'm using this example on purpose because that's part of science fiction, right? That's something that if there are beings visiting us from another planet and somehow they've figured out how to bend time and space or whatever, and they can travel millions of light years, and somehow they know that our planet contained life, then that's something that the scientific community can at least embrace from a philosophical position. And yet there are thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions, of accounts of alien abductions. Now, if you weren't there for the alien abduction, you're depending on someone else's self-reporting about the alien abduction. So you can take data by looking at these thousands of self-reported accounts of alien abductions, and you'll begin to notice, and ufologists have done this, that patterns begin to emerge. So you can get data and look for patterns through self-reporting. It's just a different approach to using reason and logic and intellect and whatever to draw conclusions about the nature of reality. But at the end of the day, we have questions about what is the actual nature of reality. And so we can look at it from this perspective of, if the material world is not all there is, if there's something that transcends the material world, then what is out there? What is out there? And I think the scarier question And I think this is one that why so many atheists gravitate towards scientific materialism. You can be an atheist or an agnostic and still acknowledge the limitations and reductionism of science and still hold to beliefs in atheism or agnosticism. But I think the reason that so many atheists gravitate towards scientific materialism is because then they don't have to deal with this other question, not just what else is out there, but the question becomes who else is out there? Who else is out there? So my bias is that there are subjective levels of reality that are connected to our minds, that are connected to our consciousness, that have an ontology, that have a nature all their own. In other words, there are levels of consciousness that I can interact with and experience and participate in that when my consciousness, whatever happens to it, whether it's extinguished at death or whether there is future lives, which I believe in, or whether there's something else, which I also believe in, that happens to us after death. I believe that we are eternal beings. I think that we're part of the structure of the universe and that we're, in a sense, neither created nor destroyed. I think these bodies serve as vehicles for our consciousness as we go through our life from birth to death, but I think there's something else, and I think that there is more. So that's my bias, fully disclosed, right? But I think the scarier question is who is out there? And this brings me then to the topic of spirit guides. So the first thing I want to say about spirit guides or encounters with beings that are non-physical, that these encounters occur mostly within the realm of the imagination or the imaginal, or they occur within. They're things that happen within us, communications and experiences that happen within us, not something that is like physical visitations, although I realize that happens. And oftentimes there's a place where the imaginal and the physical blurs, and we find or have experiences where those dimensions meet together. So you can think about all the people who have self-reported or experienced phenomenon that's non-material, non-physical, like a poltergeist or a haunted house or something like that, or apparitions that would appear, and even other people in the room would see the apparitions, but yet they're not fully solid, even though they appear to be fully solid. They're not of the material realm, in the sense that my computer's of this material realm, or my phone is of the material realm, or a glass or the plates on the wall are of the material realm, or how my body is and how your body is of the material realm. But for the most part, interactions with animal spirits, spirit guides, elemental spirits, angels, demons, Jesus, God, Holy Spirit, presence, all of those things occur on the inner planes. They occur within, or they occur within the imagination. Now, in our culture, in our society, and this is very purposeful by the powers that be, this is very purposeful conditioning for the economic system in which we live. Don't kid yourself. Science is driven by economic realities. Whoever can come up with the newest invention or the newest progress, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in communication, whether it be in travel, stands to gain a lot economically. And so at the end of the day, resources and money drives just about everything. It drives just about everything. And so we're conditioned then to discount the imagination. And so here's what I mean. I realize people who are dismissive of things like spirit guides or of God in general, or of mystical experiences, or people who have had encounters, let's say, especially with Jesus, people that are skeptical of that and are very dismissive of that usually have a strong, whether they admit it or not, a very strong leaning and presupposition towards scientific materialism, or that the world out there is the only thing that has real ontology, a real ontological reality. And they think their arguments are so strong and so persuasive to everybody because we all live in this world. We all experience it every day. And we have very strong collective agreements on what's out there. Take the moon, for example. We all see the moon. We all see the sun come up. We all take it for granted that the sun's going to come up. And so these things are very self-evident to us. I would counter by saying that consciousness is equally, if not more so, and I'm going to make an argument for more so in a second. You'll see where I'm going with it. But I would say that consciousness, our inward experience, our inward life, is more real to us, more self-evident to us as an experience than the world around us. And I'm not the first person to make this argument. In fact, René Descartes is famous for creating this saying, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. But if you look philosophically at how he arrived at that conclusion, it was actually a pushback against scientific materialism. And he was saying the most self-evident thing to any of us is ourselves. And the fact that we think and experience, the most self-evident thing is not that which is observed, but the observer. And so what I find interesting and funny is that people that are scientific materialists and will dismiss what is out there or who is out there and won't even engage with or explore those possibilities and those questions and be curious about them or even open-minded about them, but they will mock people who talk about those experiences as though they're somehow less than. I would say that that's ludicrous because, again, in the standing on the shoulders of René Descartes, right? The most self-evident thing to you is you. The most self-evident thing to you is your own thoughts. So what is most self-evident is not the object, it's the observer or the subject. The subject is actually more self-evident than the object. And yet the subject is what we just throw in the garbage can and say, well, it's just the result of these electric and chemical processes that take place within the brain. And oh yeah, by the way, there's no intelligent design to the brain. The brain just somehow developed over many trial and error. I mean, basically, right? That's what it is. It's just trial and error until we get this magnificent thing called the brain that creates for us the feeling of love, the emotion of joy, depression and anxiety as well, the taste of coffee and all the various experiences that enrich our lives. Where does inspiration come from? It just comes from that goo inside your head. Where does inspiration for music and arts? Where does inspiration for philosophical ideas? Where does inspiration for meaning about life? Where does spirituality come from? It's just a byproduct of what's out there. I find that to be absolutely, totally ludicrous. Ludicrous. And I'm not trying to be dismissive of anybody. I'm just saying this is how I've thought it through. I cannot embrace that as a reality because the most true thing, that the most apparent and self-evident thing about me is me. Now, here's, and I'll make this argument as well, that children, small children, their internal world is far more real to them. Their imagination is far more real to them and self-evident to them and actualized in them than the world out there. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to go to school, right? And so we have been conditioned by a culture to dismiss the imagination as a valid means of access to reality. In fact, if we say that's just my imagination, we're saying it's not reality, it's just my imagination. Because we are conditioned through our society and through our schooling, for economic reasons, by the way, to shut those faculties down, to stop experiencing the experience of ourselves, to stop experiencing the observer, daydreaming, imaginary friends, pretending, magical thinking, so that we can turn our focus to the objective physical world out there. So we're taught in school. Nobody teaches us how to engage and work with our imagination. I believe that's possible. I believe it'd be fruitful and beneficial for humanity. I think it's something that we had the potential in the early 20th century to take a track down that road, but instead we, I mean, like this either or thing, and we sided with scientific materialism when we threw the rest of that in the garbage bin, instead of having an and both approach. But at any rate, back to what I'm talking about. So the imagination is very alive in you as a child. Your inner world is very alive in you as a child, but you're told in school to pay attention. You're told in school to stop daydreaming, stop being distracted. You have ADHD. Now we have to medicate you. And I'm not negating the reality of ADHD, by the way, and I'm not negating the benefits of medication for people who genuinely need that to help them in their executive functioning. A lot of people talk stuff about ADHD, especially on the internet and YouTube. They don't know the first thing about it, much less how to diagnose it. And certainly teachers and school counselors are not qualified to diagnose your child with ADHD, but that's for another time. I really have thought about doing a channel on neurodivergency and raising neurodivergent kids, or putting something out on that. So if there's interest in that, let me know. But that's, I'm getting off on a rabbit trail for sure. My point is that then if someone keeps their imagination active and alive, then we have all kinds of words that have negative impressions and impacts upon people. We call them flighty. We call them not grounded. We call them dreamers. In the world of psychology and therapy, magical thinking in every aspect is considered to be immaturity and considered to be harmful and considered to be at the root cause of OCD and codependency and things like that. And certainly there are some negative aspects of magical thinking. In other words, it can be used wrong in a way that can be used against us. But I would argue there are also some very positive things about magical thinking. And so I'm trying to live my life and think through these things and share with you on this channel and in the New Day Global group, a community of people who are open to everything in the sense of coming at it from a very reasoned and well put together and both approach, that we can have benefits from the use of our imagination, that we can use it, our imagination that is, as a way of knowing and a way of experiencing and expressing and explaining even reality. And that doesn't mean that there's no benefit to the penetration, to penetrating the world out there, the objective world that's out there. So back to the question, who's out there? If there are things that science will never be able to measure or explain or come up with, and I know this rubs the cat's fur the wrong way for a lot of people, I think given it a sufficient enough amount of time, you don't know that. You don't know that, because what I'm saying is there are aspects of reality that science will never understand. Now, I am building that upon a presupposition, just like the person who says, given a sufficient enough amount of time, it will be explained. That's also a presupposition. So I'm building it on my bias. They have their bias. So this is my channel. I get to share my bias. So, but it's not a bias that's based on just philosophy. It's a bias that's based on experience. It's a bias that's based on experience. But I do need to say that when we're dealing with spirit guides, we are dealing with the imaginal realm. That does not mean that it's not real. That does not mean that it does not give you access to good guidance or good information. And, we probably even shouldn't call them spirit guides, because the term itself implies that they're there to give us guidance. And that certainly may be the case. Now, something that's interesting that people may not know about Carl Jung, and that even current Jungian analysts, which I'm not one, are hesitant to recognize or deal with because of the prejudices of scientific materialism that are built into the presuppositions of the academic world and the academies, is that Jung did his own private work. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Carl Jung proposed several theories about consciousness, and his primary contribution, I suppose, would be that he talked about the collective unconscious and archetypes. So we have the archetype, Joseph Campbell popularized the hero's journey many decades ago, did a PBS special. And so some people are familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell, where he talks about the archetype of the hero. The archetype of the hero shows up in literature. It shows up in Star Wars. It shows up in Lord of the Rings. In Star Wars, Luke leaves his home planet, faces adversity, has to overcome not only enemies outside, but has to overcome things within himself, and then returns triumphantly. Same thing with Frodo and Lord of the Rings. And, there's been lots done on the hero archetype. So I'm just giving you that example of the hero archetype. And he said, these things are not personal. He said they are transpersonal. In other words, they are aspects of our consciousness that exist in all of us, regardless of our learning or our genetics or our experience. But Carl Jung also did work that he never really talked about in what's called the Red Book that has now been published, where he not only recognized the reality of these archetypes, but he engaged with these archetypes. Now, the question then becomes one of ontology. And I'm going to bring this into spirit guides, an unfortunate term, but one I'm going to use to be clear in my communication anyway. Do these archetypes, do these entities that we meet when we're in meditation, or that when we're doing a shamanic journey, or when we're engaging with what we call our spirit guides, or when we're engaging, for some of us that are mystical Christians, with Christ, or whatever the case may be, do they have an ontology? Do they have a nature like the mountains outside my window have a nature? In other words, when my consciousness, I don't believe consciousness ceases to exist, but for the sake of argument, if my consciousness were to die, would all of that die with it? Or am I just engaging with ideas? That's the question. Is the hero archetype just an idea? Or is there something more going on? And so Carl Jung began to engage with his own inner characters. Now, we all have characters. We all have a population. We all have a community inside of us as well as outside of us. We all do. It's inescapable. You may deny that you do, but you do. You absolutely do. If you've ever gotten into an argument with someone and walked away and ruminated about how the situation could have gone differently and how you could have done things differently, then you are arguing with something, an image of that other person. An introject is what they call it in psychology, of that other person. But that other person in those interactions, you're not consciously thinking about and controlling how they're responding to you. Mostly, they kind of take on a creative life of their own. And again, this is evident in children. Some children have imaginary friends. I had imaginary friends. So I suppose I was predisposed to go this direction. I was very much a daydreamer. I was very much artistic. I was very much imaginative in my temperament and orientation as a child. I was also very oriented to science, by the way. So maybe it's all that inner child work I've been doing that's bringing me to these and both conclusions. But either way, that's beside the point. So Carl Jung brought these characters forth and allowed them to have a life of their own and engaged with them, and then would write about and draw about his inner space and inner reality and inner engagement, and recorded it in what's called the Red Book. And I think, although I'm not sure, that the Red Book might have been published after his death, but I don't think he ever talked about it in his public work. So the question becomes, let me approach the question from this way. When I was in Christian ministry, I had many visions of Jesus and many encounters with Jesus that were very powerful. I received insights. I received precognitions, information about the future. I received information, very specific information about other people. I could feel a presence, like I was hosting a presence. It cracks me up when people try to say everything that we experienced in charismatic world was all emotionalism. Listen, if I have an area of expertise, meaning I put in 10,000 hours and more on a particular topic, it's the emotions and emotional regulation and emotional dysregulation. And so I think I'm a little bit qualified to know the difference between what's just emotionalism and what is actually the hosting of something else. And so there are many times that I felt I was hosting a presence that we would call the Holy Spirit, or that I would have interactions and visions in the imaginal realm or in dreams with the Christ figure or with Jesus. And as I was deconstructing and I was talking to people, one of the arguments that I would be given, or one of the questions Sometimes it was an argument. Sometimes it was just a question. Jesus appeared to you. Jesus appeared to me. Jesus appeared to this person over in Africa, but he looks different. There are things about him and aspects of him that are different. Absolutely true. The Jesus that appeared to, let's say, prosperity preacher is totally different than the Jesus that appears, like, let's say, appeared to David Wilkerson back in the 70s, whose Jesus opposed the prosperity gospel and the prosperity movement. And so here's where we get into the problem when we're dealing with these subjective realities, because we participate in the process. When you're dealing with these things, the lines between observer and the observed, or between the subject and the object, are not there. The two are interpenetrating to create the experience. If you think about sexual intercourse, the two people who come together in sexual intercourse are creating the experience together. They're both experiencing it and participating in the experience. But we would never say that either person wasn't real, that they didn't have an ontology of their own. And so the conclusion I came to was that I am putting the face or the God form, or I'm creating the space in my imagination when I imagine Jesus. And with that comes all of my doctrine, all of my beliefs, all of my presuppositions about who Jesus is. But that does not mean that I was just talking to myself. That does not mean that there isn't a Christ with an ontological reality that exists on the inner planes, whose light or wisdom is not coming through. So that's where it gets a little bit messy. And that's why I think the term spiritual guide or spirit guide is a little bit unfortunate for us. So keep that in mind if you're working with spirit guides, right? So if you want to contact, so the question becomes, who is out there? So for me, this was a really important question, because for me, there was Jesus that was out there when I was a Christian. There was Jesus that was out there. There was the Holy Spirit that was out there. And there were angels and archangels out there that were the good guys and okay to listen to and hear from and take guidance from. And then there were demons, demonic spirits and demonic entities that were out posing as angels of light, posing as spirit guides, that were there to deceive and mislead people and take them away from their faith. Or on the farther end of the spectrum, were taking possession of people like we see in the movie The Exorcist, or afflicting and oppressing people and things like that. And that they all had this sort of ontological, very clear-cut reality apart from me. Now, my problem started to happen when I got deeper into meditation and I got deeper into the imaginal realm. Other stuff, and I say stuff, other beings that had a sort of a life of their own began to show up in those experiences. In some cases, it would be departed loved ones who would give me very specific information about situations that happened or about who they were, that then I would share with people, much like a psychic does. And that information, which was in a few cases quite detailed, could be confirmed by the person to whom their loved one was speaking. That's necromancy in the Bible, and it's forbidden, even though Jesus talked to Moses and Elijah. But even though Hebrews 12 says we're surrounded by our ancestors, a great cloud of witnesses. But anyway. And then my awakening experience happened when I went into meditation, and an entity that looked like Mr. Smith from the Matrix series guided me through the timeline of my life and told me the truth about myself. And then I've engaged with many other guides and presences since then. Now, it's very easy for Christians who want it just very black and white, and they don't have any questions or curiosities, and they're not open, to say that I was just being misled and led astray. But the problem is that Jesus said in the Bible that Satan is the father of lies, and it's impossible for Satan to tell the truth. And yet I knew at a very deep level that Mr. Smith was telling me the truth about myself and penetrating the lies that I had been telling myself under the guise of religion. And then I found out later that the Jesus figure that I had interacted with, or at least one of the Jesus figures that I had interacted with in my imagination, was lying to me on a very deep level. So it's not as simple as my Pentecostal Baptist evangelical fundamentalist brethren would like, and sistren would like to make it out to be. So what about you? Do you have a spirit guide? Do you need a spirit guide? If you're interacting with a spirit guide, how do you interact with the spirit guide? How do you discern truth from error? How do you discern what's objectively real and what's merely subjective? What I would say is that we're all doing this all the time anyway. There's a cutting edge psychotherapy called internal family systems, which recognizes this reality of this phenomenon that we have basically a family structure within ourselves. And what that would mean is I've got a scared 3-year-old boy inside of me. I've got both feminine and masculine aspects of that. The scared little boy, I've got the school mom. I've got the little girl who just wants to do home ec type stuff, because I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, so that's going to form my childhood psyche. I'm not saying that women are only good for home ec. I'm just saying that that's how they exist within my own psyche, because the way I was conditioned culturally. And internal family systems, my point is, recognizes that we are a collection of selves, and that these selves all have a life of their own, and that to become balanced and to deal with things like anxiety and depression, we need to have a healthy internal family system or network of relating, so that we can be our healthiest and best self. And this consists of all kinds of, I've got the toxic masculine side of me as well. I've got the powerful feminine part of me, which in my paradigm and structure of my psyche and world, it's the feminine aspect that is more in touch and in tune with the spiritual realm and the spiritual dimensions, that it is the feminine aspect that actually accesses this. And so for a lot of men who have just gone completely to logic and reason and initiation and materialism, you'll notice that they have a lot of characteristics of toxic masculinity that come out in them, given the sufficient amount of time or the right context or right situation. We all have those aspects within us. I'm not trying to be super controversial here. I'm just trying to explain internal family systems. So there's that aspect, but what about what's beyond that? What about that which we host in our lives, in the living rooms of our imagination, that goes beyond our personal psychology, that gets into what Carl Jung called the transpersonal? So what about the presence of archangels that may manifest, and we can feel their presence, and we can feel their, what people call higher vibrations, and we receive wisdom and knowledge and understanding from these beings? Or what about darker sides of us? I have yet to work with someone in psychotherapy that did not have an internal critic that was very demonic-like, that was very vicious and accusing and oppressive, that had seemingly a life of its own that was controlling the person. So we have these aspects of ourselves. Now, I have come to believe through my own experience and thinking this through, that those entities do have an ontology. They do have an ontological reality. In other words, they have an existence that is independently their own, that they are sentient beings. They're just not part of this physical world and of this physical dimension. And that if we explore these realms, that we can interact with these sentient beings. then how do we interact with these sentient beings? Well, first of all, imagination is key. The imaginal realm is key. Was that just my imagination? Well, yeah, it was just your imagination, but that doesn't mean your imagination is not valid for information. I'm going to say it again. Was that just my imagination? Yes, but that does not mean that your imagination is not valid for information. But that also means that you're not just talking to yourself, and you're not just encountering or interacting with stuff that's just part of your brain and part of your internal world that does not have an existence, a sentient existence outside of that. So so one last point and then I'll conclude. However, just like it is unhealthy for you to give over your autonomy, the control of your own life, your free will, and yes, I believe in free will, and yes, I know the arguments against it, and they're formidable. But it's important to not give up your autonomy, just like you wouldn't want to do that to a person, just like that creates a toxic, unhealthy relationship. Or let me put it this way, a toxic and unhealthy person will demand that you give up your autonomy and freedom to them so that they can control you. Therefore, any entity that would demand of you in the imaginal realm, that would demand of you that you give up your autonomy, that you give up your free will, that you follow them to the exclusion of where you're at this point in your conscious and spiritual evolution, is not coming with goodwill or good intention to you. Just like a person who wants to manipulate and control you is not coming with goodwill and good intention. Now, they're not going to announce to you, I have bad will and bad intention. So when you get that feeling of pressure, I have to follow this. I have to check in with my guides and see what they say. And then I'm just going to go with what they say because they're so wise and they're so above me and they're so much more powerful than me. That's not a healthy space to be. And chances are more than likely you're not dealing with the type of entity that you actually think that you're dealing with. There are people who have, who choose left-hand path magic, who work with entities that have been identified culturally and socially and spiritually and religiously as demons for millennia. And those entities, as they interact with them, increase their self-empowerment, increase their autonomy, help them to resolve traumas and psychological issues and stuff. So number one, I would say realize these things happen in the imagination realm. Number two, you never give up your autonomy or your free will to any entity, human or non-human. So there's respect for that. There's respect for who you are as your own sentient being and where you're at in your own level of conscious evolution. That needs to exist. In other words, there's boundaries in a relational sense that need to exist with quote unquote so-called spirit guides, spiritual entities, and things that you encounter on the inner planes and in the realms of consciousness. But then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, for those of you who interact with these things and walk with these things, I want you to realize that we are hosting presences. We are hosting these entities, these beings within ourselves. And as they interact with us and as we host them, they can empower us, they can bless us, they can advise us, and they can enrich and impact our lives on the material plane and enrich and impact the exploration of our inner world. And so that's my talk on spirit guides and the nature of reality. I hope you enjoyed it. If you watched all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. If you watched all the way to the end, then I trust that I earned your subscription. So please like and subscribe. Comment your thoughts on this. Comment your experiences with these kinds of things. And Sunday mornings at 12 Eastern, 10 a.m. my time here in Colorado Mountain Time, I do Sunday morning live. I follow that up usually on Monday nights, not always, but usually on Monday nights with follow-up from the previous teaching or question and answers. Last Monday, I did an interview with Tommy Stewart. And so join the New Day Global Group if you want access to those things. Again, if you like the work and you'd like to support us, we're doing this completely free. You can see that my views and subscribers on YouTube, although it's monetized, doesn't really move the needle for us. So if you'd like to contribute to support what we're doing and consider supporting us on a monthly basis, the link to our PayPal is also in this description. Thank you for watching it. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell so you know when new content comes out. Thank you for watching. I'm Aaron Tomlinson, and I look forward to the next video and being with you live this Sunday.